Let those with two shoes sell one and buy a sword, and those with two trousers shall sell one and buy a sword, because now it is time for revolution, and this revolution is no longer on the streets. This revolution is not on Facebook, social media. This revolution is in the mind, because if your mind is not free, your body will be the instruments of your own oppression. That is why Steve Biko said the most potent weapon in the mind or in the hands of the oppressor is actually the mind of the oppressed. Peace and power to all African people. Peace and freedom. Peace and decolonization. It is always a pleasure to have our weekly conversation. And from the African Continental Unity Party, I salute you. As you can see today, we want to talk about Kanye West on a revolutionary angle, because everything that happens in our environment must be a lesson for us to understand how we can progress and how we can win this fight for African liberation and emancipation. Because as it was said by Dr. John Henry Clark, everything that happens in your life around you must be your instrument for liberation, and including whatever that we see happening to other people must be able to serve us as a lesson that we have to utilize for our liberation or for our struggle for liberation and emancipation. So what I want to talk about today regarding Kanye West is what was reported recently, that he is willing to buy the social media called Parler. And the question, as you can see on the title of this video, the question is, why right now? Why just now he is willing to buy the social media Parler? And the answer, as all of you know it already, the answer is simple, is that he's being kicked out of Twitter, out of Instagram, so therefore he has, taken it upon himself to buy his own social media now, so that he can have a free speech, because he's in trouble with Twitter as well as Instagram. So I don't want to go in the reason why he is in trouble with Instagram, why he was kicked out of Instagram or Twitter or stuff like that. That's not my concern. My question actually is, why just now that he want to buy his own social media? Because he has been billionaire for a long time. He had the money and the capacity to buy whatever social media that he can for a long time. And there have been a lot of social media that he can buy, not even buy, but to build his own for a long time. Why does he want to buy just now? Because he has been kicked out of Instagram and he has been kicked out of Twitter. So in other words, he wants to react. He wants to react to the fact that he has been kicked out of, Instagram and Twitter, and he need to buy his own social media now. He need to obviously acquire his own social media so that he can continue to talk. So I don't know what this can tell you, but for me this tells me that he is actually a reactionary activist. I don't know if I can call him activist, but he's a prototype of many African intellectual, many African activists, many African so-called fighters, or many African so-called revolutionaries. They are mostly not proactive, but they are reactionary. The only time they realize that something is wrong and there is an action that needs to be taken is when they have their backs against the wall. Is when they have their backs against the wall, when they have no other options. That's when they realize that there is something wrong and we need to build for our own, so that we can obviously have our own thing and manage our own thing. The only time that we as African people, as I said, what Kanye is doing is actually a prototype of many so-called African intellectuals or African revolutionaries or activists, we are basing our activities or our activism on reacting on something bad that is being done to us. Not really on being proactive in a sense of looking at our situation in the next 20 years, in the next 50 years, in the next 100 years, and come up with the plans in order to guarantee that us as a people, we have a place and we have, the right to live and to dictate our own future in this world. Most of our actions are based on reactions. Most of our activities are based on reactions, on reacting every time something bad happens in our lives. And this is not the proper revolution that Africa needs at this moment. Because every time that you need to react after your enemy has acted, he then controls your life. Let me repeat that again. Every time you react because your enemy has done something, then he controls your life. In other words, you wouldn't do something for yourself until your enemy does something against you. That is when you now decide to stand up and to begin thinking what you can do and how you can do it. But when things are normal, in a normal situation, when there's nothing wrong done to you particularly, you don't take action. You don't take action and you go with the flow. So this is not a kind of revolution that we need in Africa. And unfortunately, this is the revolution that we see with all those so-called revolutionaries in Africa. They are reactionaries. They are not proactive. And this is not what Africa wants, because when we react after they have acted, our actions are based on defensive, are based on survival, are based on emotions. And there's no rationality on our actions, and there is no vision, a clear vision of a future perspective. Because it's one thing to react in order to defend yourself, and it is another thing to sit down and think in terms of future perspective, in terms of 50 years, in terms of 100 years, and come up with a plan of things that you need to do in order to guarantee your success. But in most cases, we don't do that. We only wait to see African men gunned down by police in America so that we can go down the streets and then start talking about revolution and start crying about Black Lives Matters and stuff like that. We need to see an African person mistreated in India or mistreated in China so that we can now obviously invade the social media and talk about revolution, talk about how Africa must change and how things have to change. But when the situation comes back to normal, we don't see most of those called revolutionaries. I don't know how many people I can remember I've come across during the 2020 global protest that was triggered by George Floyd's death in America. I've seen a lot of people taking, on social media to show how they are activists, how they are anti-imperialism, how they are anti-white supremacy, and so all these labels, big labels that they want to put in. But since then, since that issue has gone, we don't see many of them again talking now. But let's see something bad happen again. Like when the President Magufuli of Tanzania mysteriously died, we see lots of them again coming over social media and trying to show that they are revolutionaries and they are activists. But when things are normal, when it's quiet, you don't see any revolutionary. You don't see any activist. You don't see any Pan-Africanist. You don't see anybody claiming about the change that Africa needs to undergo and whatever else that needs to be done for the change to take place. And this is not how we are going to change Africa, only by reacting after the Western world has acted upon us, only by reacting, by responding to provocations from the West or from the China. This is not how we are going to build Africa, on reacting or on being defensive. We must understand that the work of revolution that is needed in order to rebuild Africa must be taken by the proactive revolutionaries. It means we must be able to sit down and to think, regardless of the situation, whether there is something bad that has happened to us, whether there is a black man that is being killed by the police in America, or whether there is a country that is being invaded by by a foreign power in Africa, or whatever the situation. We need to look at the global politics and to realize that we as African people, as long as we are weak, as long as we are defenseless, as long as we don't have the power, we will be always the prey of those who have the power. And we will be always the victims of whatever shift that takes place at the level of global politics. Therefore, we need to begin by now building our own power base right now as Africa in order to defend ourselves, in order to protect ourselves, in order to obviously to create our own economy, which is not really relying solely on foreign interferences and geopolitics. So this is what we need to understand, and that is what we call a proper revolution. And that revolution is for the people who work day and night, no matter what is happening, on the ground, whether there is peace or there is nothing. This revolution is a constant job. Whether when you wake up in the morning thinking every day what you need to do in order to add some values to the struggle of African liberation and emancipation. And every night before you go to sleep, you think about what you will do in the next morning in order to add more values to our struggle for liberation and emancipation. And that is the only way we will begin to see change, because that will be a job that we do being pushed by our own desire to acquire the power that we need to make Africa great again, but not a job that is being triggered by emotions, by reactions, by bad things that other people have done to us. Because what we'll be doing in that instance is just to respond to them, but not to be proactively building something for our own. So I think this is where we need to change a lot as African people. This is where we need to work a lot. And this requires that we look into ourselves. We look into ourselves, we look inwards to see what has to be changed, what has to be improved, and what has to be obviously corrected. Instead of always looking outside on what bad things that other people do to us so that we can obviously go down the street and begin to protest. That is why we have always starting by stating that this revolution is no longer on the streets. This revolution is not even on social media. This revolution is in the mind, because every time you go down the streets, you are addressing to people you believe have the power to attend to your problem. Because when we go down the street, we are protesting to ask for certain things to be done for us. We ask for job, we ask for economy, we ask for, infrastructure, we ask for service delivery, we ask for justice. And the question is, to whom are we addressing all those questions, all those requests? To people whom we believe have the power to do for us what we are supposed to be doing for ourselves. Therefore, streets protest, streets movement has never been a proper answer to the revolution that Africa needs. Street violence has never been a proper approach or a proper revolutionary approach that Africa needs for our liberation and emancipation. So before we go down the streets there to protest or to ask other people to do for us, the question we need to ask ourselves is, what can we do today ourselves? What can we do for ourselves by ourselves today? Because the only organization that can work for the interest of the people is only that organization that people come together and build for themselves. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. The only organization that can work for our interest is the organization, is that one we come together and build. Is the only organization that will obviously respond accurately to our problems and our requests. And what is that organization now as we're speaking? We have none. We are addressing our problems to, we are addressing our problem to, I don't know, to United Nations, which we know is being controlled by, by the international hegemony. We are addressing our problems to, I don't know, the ICC, which is the International Criminal Court. We are addressing our problems to these institutions controlled by the West. But we don't ask the question of what are the institutions that we have built ourselves in order to look after our interest. Because as I said, the only organization that can bring justice, the only organization that can bring transformation in our lives, the only organization that can bring economy in our communities is only that organization that we build for ourselves. In other words, this revolution requires that Africa and Africans must adopt a different mindset. And that mindset is, we must realize that we have a problem. Every day we have a problem. Whether we are being kicked out of social media or not, we have a problem. We don't have to wait for Facebook to blackmail us so that we can think about how we can create our own social media or our own media platforms. We don't have to wait for Twitter or for Instagram to kick us out so that we can think about how we can build our own media platforms. We need to be proactive as a nation, as a people, globally speaking. That means Africans in the continent and Africans abroad. We need to understand that we need our own tools of propaganda. That means the media. We need to own them. We need our own tools for financial transactions. And I'm talking about the banks. What are the international banks that we have as African people? We need our own tools for education. I'm talking about schools and universities. We need our own tools for security. And I'm talking about military capability in order to protect and defend Africa. We need our own tools for knowledge. We're talking about scientific institutions, laboratories, and all this stuff that is needed or that are needed now in order for a people who are respecting themselves to be able to, to project themselves in the future. So we need all these institutions without even waiting for somebody to kick us out of their institutions so that we can think about them. So we need to be proactive to begin building them. But unfortunately, our African elites, that means those who have the money, the richest black people in the world, they don't think about it. They only begin to think when, obviously, they realize that the world in which we are living is not actually as they thought it was. It is a completely different world where the color plays an important role than the merits or obviously than the hard work that many people do. We are in the world of exploitation where capitalism obviously runs the world, runs the churches, runs everything. So when they realize that the world is ruled by white supremacy, injustices, and all this kind of stuff that ordinary African people coming across every day, then they start thinking about building our own institutions. So we need to be proactive. This revolution requires that we work on permanent basis, on daily basis, in order to do for ourselves what other people have pretended to do for us. Because what other people can only do is to pretend. But we are the only people who must be in the forefront of whatever needs to be done so that Africa of tomorrow is not going to be Africa of today or of yesterday, but it's going to be Africa where Africans are free, liberated, and emancipated by themselves and for themselves. Peace and power and peace and blessing to all of you. Again, if you have two shoes now, it is time to sell one and buy a sword. If you have two trousers, it is time to sell one and buy a sword. Because now it is time for revolution. And this revolution is not going to be on streets. This revolution is not going to remain on Facebook, even though we are interacting now on Facebook. But this revolution must be first in the mind. The black man must open his mind, must begin to think that it's only when we begin to do for ourselves what other people have pretended to do for us, then Africa will be served. And if you want to engage yourself with with like-minded people, if you like this struggle for liberation, please join us in the African Continental Unity Party. Let us work together and fight together and win together for the benefits of all of us. Peace and power until then. Thank you.